Peace and blessings, African family. Today is the 30th of December 2021. Welcome to another series of African history and the African origins of civilization. Today we are going to look at the African origins of the modern calendar. Today we are using the Gregorian calendar that replaced the Julian calendar. Both of them are actually Roman calendars. And you are now looking at the oldest calendar. This one was depicted at Komombo Temple, but the calendar is definitely much older than the Komombo Temple. And just to give a brief context, in Kemetic they developed an even more sophisticated calendar called the zodiac, which consists of 25,000. It's basically a cycle of 20 that takes approximately 25,000 years to complete, and within that 25,000 great year cycle, there are 12 ages, each approximately 12,000 years. So, and the temple and the zodiac calendar was constructed. The last one that was found, or the one that has been found by archaeologists, was a Dendera temple, and that was constructed in 1995, before the Common Era. So that's over 4,000 years. So this calendar that we are looking at now is the basis of the Gregorian calendar that we're using. It consists of the 12 months, 365 days cycle. This calendar was based on 3 seasons. The 12 months were broken down into 3 seasons, and the 3 seasons are the Aket, which is the inundation or flooding of the Nile, the Peret, which is the growing or the sowing season, and the Shemu, which is the season of harvest. And so the 12 months were then named in accordance with the season. So the first part of the naming was the actual season, and the secondary part being the Neteru, or the so-called deity or god or goddess. So that is essentially the African origins of a calendar. And in terms of where we are today in line with the African calendar, seeing that in the Roman calendar, tomorrow marks the end of the Roman calendar, which becomes New Year's Eve. In the African calendar, in the ancient African calendar, beginning at Kemet, the ancient Egyptian one, the first month of the year is called Aket Tehuti, Aket being the season of the inundation. This is the beginning of the flooding of the Nile. And Tehuti is then the Neteru who's known as the Neteru of science, wisdom, and the invention of writing. So in the Gregorian calendar, the first month of the year in the ancient Egyptian calendar would then fall between the 11th of September and the 10th of October. So it begins, so we are currently in the 4th month which is the Koyak, which in the Gregorian calendar would then fall between the 10th of December and the 8th of January. So we are roughly in the beginning of the year already, the first quarter. So the year, why did the year begin during that time? And the question is, does it matter which calendar we follow? Should we be following the Roman calendar and celebrate the New Year in the next 2 days, or should we follow the one of our ancestors? That's the question. So to answer that question, I will provide the reason why the year began in September. So in the northern hemisphere, in Kemetic, the year began in September because of the flooding of the Nile. So the waters are very key to spiritual concepts all around the world, beginning in Africa, of course. We see that in all creation stories, whether be it in the Bible, when you read in the book of Genesis chapter 1, the creation story begins with the waters, you know. And when you go into the oldest creation story, which is an African story, in the Memphite theology, we find that the beginning of creation is the primordial waters of Nun. And all of that is what we call African sacred science. So when we look at African spirituality is a science. It's not idolatry. It is science. It is the patterns of nature that God has placed. So anyone that follows African sacred science is basically following the hand of God, because that's what our ancestors did. They followed the hand of God. They looked at the signature that God had put out there, the patterns that God had put out, and they incorporated themselves into those patterns. That means they were aligning themselves with the laws and the principles that God had put in the universe. And so when the waters, we also come to understand the importance of the waters, that the beginning, or that the waters mark the beginning of all things. We can even see it in creation stories in Asia, but all of these have their origin in Africa. So we can even see when a child is born, the beginning of the child coming into the world begins with the breaking of the waters of that child's mother. So this, we can see these are scientific concepts which are our ancestors. Hence one cannot separate African spirituality and the sciences. That's why even the cell phones that we use today, the computers, they operate through a system of communication, algorithms and binary codes that are purely based on African spirituality, African divination systems. So it is impossible to separate African spirituality and science, and therefore African spirituality is the best interpretation of God's work. So the question is, should we be celebrating the new year on the 1st of January in the Gregorian calendar, or should we be following the 1st of September, or rather September in, and also just to add, 11th of September in ancient Egypt being the new year, and in Ethiopia it is the 11th of September as well. The Happy River, the Nile River, flows through Ethiopia as well. So now in Southern Africa, to show the correlation between these concepts. In Southern Africa, in the Southern Hemisphere, the New Year is marked by the waters as well. Because the New Year in Southern Africa is basically the spring equinox. And the spring equinox introduces the beginning of the rainy season. And the rainy season is now the time for the rains come back, and the sun, as the earth is closer to the sun, and then we start witnessing the rebirth of nature. The plants that were dead due to being far away from the sun are now coming back to life, and we can see rebirth. It's time of rebirth, times of new beginnings, and this can be witnessed in the blossoming of the flowers and the plants all around us. So it's a scientific phenomenon. So in Southern Africa, the New Year is basically also in the same season as in ancient Egypt as well, during the Akhet Tahuti. With the difference is the spring equinox is the guide, but the waters that mark the beginnings are the rains in Southern Africa. So, and more interesting about that is the fact that our ancestors in the Southern Hemisphere would see that the new beginnings have dawned upon us, that it's time for the sowing season. They would see it because of this constellation called the Orion constellation. In ancient Egypt, it's called the Sahu. And these three stars are called the belt of Orion. So in ancient Egypt, the Sahu represented the body of a star in the heavens. So these being the arms, the belt, and the feet. So in Southern Africa, these three stars, this constellation, was the sign to our ancestors that it was time for the sowing season to begin. And these three stars are called, in Xitsonga, they are called Shirimela. And the root of the word Shirimela is Rima. Rima means to plow. And in Sesotho, it's called Silimela, which has the same meaning. The root of the word is Lima. Lima means to plow. And the interesting part about this constellation representing Asa in ancient Egypt is that Asa is the Neteru of vegetation, the god of vegetation, of agriculture. Remember, we were talking about plowing, Hulima, Urima. And Asa represented that. It is often portrayed in green, with green skin. And the green skin basically is a metaphor. Does not mean he had green skin. So the green skin represents green. Then when nature, when the spring equinox starts or the new beginnings start, what we see is that the vegetation that was dead becomes green again. Green means new life. It speaks of life. So Asa was slain by his brother, and his body cut into 14 pieces, and his wife Aset put his body back together again. So the green represents him coming back to life, his rebirth. And that concept of rebirth is seen, as I portrayed in the previous video, on the ancient African origins of Christmas, where we actually saw that Asa was laying in a coffin in a bas relief from Abydos, where he was, his body is buried as a seed into the ground, and out of the coffin we see a tree growing out of that. So that is basically the concept of the seed being sown into the ground, dies and bring forth much fruit. So the tree that comes out of his tomb or his grave, that is the green on his skin color. That represents new life. That is his son being born on the winter solstice during the Aquarius, the current month that we are in the ancient Kemetic month of the 4th month of the Kemetic calendar. And so during this time of the year, throughout the year rather, in the Kemetic calendar, there were many ceremonies, and one of the ceremonies was that during the sowing season they would celebrate the resurrection of Asa, which takes us back to the sowing season in Southern Africa. Same concept, same thought. The inundation of the Nile was marked by the brightest star in the night sky, which is called Sirius A, which marked what do they call it? Helical rising of the star, then introduced the flooding of the Nile, or the inundation of the Nile. So going back to the question of should we be celebrating the New Year according to the Romans, you'll be the judge. I will read from one of the most ancient texts, the most ancient scriptures in the book or the chapter of Coming Forth by Day. It says, Repe em Haru em Ket Abba Amehet. And that means the chapter of Coming Forth by Day after having traversed the tomb. So what is the tomb that is being spoken of here? As African people, we have been during the season of in the great year, the age of Pisces, which is portrayed with the two fish that are submerged in water. Submerged consciousness speaks of sleep, and sleep is synonymous with death. So during this season, African people have been in a deep sleep, like Lazarus. So we are now entering into the coming of the age, the new age, the age of Aquarius. In terms of astronomy, the age of Aquarius is coming, the age of Pisces is actually coming to an end and introducing the new age of Pisces. The new age of Aquarius. The age of Pisces is ending and we are going into the age of Aquarius. So, with that being said, African people have been in that deep sleep, and we're going to find out why we even ended up in the fate that we are in terms of death or sleep. Because African people have been ruling the world for 4,000 years. We have done great exploits, which the world today still consider mysterious. If you're looking at the Great Pyramids, today the greatest scientific minds cannot explain how the pyramids were built. Because these were built during a time when African people walked like gods upon the earth. Just as the book of Psalms says, I have said that ye are gods. So to understand why we came into a state of stupor, of sleep, of death spiritually, I will go to the book of Daniel in the Bible to show where we actually went wrong. So I'll start with the book of Daniel, chapter number 2. And in verse 23, it says, I praise you and honor you, God of my ancestors. All right, please remember that part. And then we are then going to the book of Daniel, chapter 11. So the book of Daniel, chapter 11, discusses in the form of a prophecy the fate of the king of Syria and his fate, the destructive fate of the king of Syria. So at the end of chapter 11 it says, he will even set up his huge royal tents between the sea and the mountain on which the temple stands, but he will die and with no one there to help him. So the question is, why does his fate end in destruction? So this we have to back up a bit to find out why. So in verse 37 it says, the king will ignore the God his ancestors served. And then in verse 38 it says, instead he will honor the God who protects fortresses. He will offer gold, silver, jewels, and other rich gifts to a God his ancestors never worshipped. And in verse 39 it says, to defend his fortresses he will use people who worship a foreign god. So I'd like to basically highlight three phrases here. The first one being, ignore the God of his ancestors. Or ignore the God his ancestors served. That's number one. And number two, the phrase where it says he will honor a God his ancestors never worshipped. And then third, who worship a foreign God. So where does this apply in the question of whether we should be celebrating the New Year in January or should we go back to the ways of our ancestors? and celebrate according to the African calendar. All right, as I said in the beginning, while explaining the calendar and the naming of the months are named season. The first part of the naming of the month is the season, and the second part being the Neteru, or what people would call the deity. So why does a calendar have names of deities or the Neteru, or so-called gods? That tells us that calendars are more spiritual markers than tools for diaries as we use them today. They were originally created to mark the signs, to mark the seasons and the rituals that were performed to those specific Neteru or deities. So how does that apply to celebrating the New Year in January? So January is named after a Roman god called Janus, who is the Roman god of beginnings. So when one celebrates the New Year in January, they are worshipping a Roman god. And those people are under a spell because the world has been subjected by Europeans to the worship of the Greek and Roman gods. And when I speak of the world, I'm speaking in general, but where the people that have succumbed to the spell are actually African people, because Indians still celebrate their ceremonies according to the calendars of their ancestors, as the Bible is telling us in the book of Daniel. And so do the Chinese people. Yes, they follow the Gregorian calendar in terms of commerce, in terms of interactions with the common world, or the world in general. However, when it comes to their spiritual positioning and customs and culture, they always go back to their own calendar. So they will celebrate their own New Year and their own whatever ceremony that they celebrate. And when they do business, of course, they will refer to the month of January and all that. That's for professional reasons. But for their spiritual activities, they go back to their original calendars. The only people who have deviated from that are African people. For obvious reasons, cultural genocide was targeted at Africans. Yes, people may make the argument of British occupation of Asia and India and China, but people in China do not speak English. Africans speak a lot of English, even countries that were not colonized by the British, countries such as Mozambique. The people there speak better English than the Chinese, who were occupied by the British, and the British never occupied the people in Mozambique. So this generally shows us the contrast between the Asians and other people who were that were briefly dominated by Europeans. That the African is the one that's struggling with a spiritual warfare. When the late Bob Marley, the great Bob Marley, sang the song "Emancipate Yourself from Mental Slavery," none but ourselves can free our minds. The only way we can free our minds is when we break away from the shackles of the Western spells of worshiping European gods. And this spell is not just in the calendar and the ceremonies that we celebrate, people celebrating the New Year in January. It's not only in that. These are concepts, spiritual concepts that one needs to comprehend and not just take lightly and think, oh, well, calendar is just a calendar, but it's not. There's a reason why the Romans set it up like that. There's a reason why Europeans set it up like that. There's a reason why when you go and study law, the Europeans will refer you to the Romans, when the oldest documented law in the world is the law of Ma'at, the 48 laws of Ma'at, of ancient Egypt, aka Kemet, aka Tameri. There's also a reason why when you go and study medicine, they refer you to the Greeks and tell you about Hippocrates, but never care about the fact that Hippocrates wrote an oath swearing to an ancient Egyptian physician that lived about 2,000 years prior to his existence, calling him a god, and that is Imhotep Afrikan. So from this we can see that we have, as Africans, we are yet to emerge out of the tomb of stupor, the deep sleep, and come into the month of Aketehuti, or should I say, yes, the month of the waters being poured out, because the age of Aquarius is represented by a man carrying a pitcher of water, as the Bible says, I believe is in the book of Luke, if I'm not mistaken, where Jesus says, when you see a man carrying a pitcher of water, follow him into the house where he enters. That cannot be literal, because in Hebrew culture, men never carried water. As we all know, even when Jesus went to the well, he met a woman, because women went to the well to fetch water. So that is metaphoric. Enter into the house. What house? The house of the zodiac. There are 12 houses of the zodiac, and that is the house of Aquarius, because the ministry of Jesus represented the age of Pisces, the fish, the two fish. And Jesus preached to his first time is preaching to fishermen on a boat who are trying to catch some fish, and he tells them, I'll make you fishers of men. He feeds how many people with 2 loaves, 2 fishes and 2 and 3 loaves or something like that. And when the Pharisees ask him for a sign, he basically tells them, hey, there will be no sign. It says, he actually says that a wicked and adulterous generation seeks after a sign, but no sign shall be given unto it except the sign of Jonah in the belly of the fish. 3 days and 3 nights, so shall the Son of Man be in the belly of the earth. So the fish representing resurrection, the fish is very key in this whole matter. So what is the significance of all of this? The significance is, as African people, we are yet to emerge. We are either gonna emerge out of the waters of stupor, the tomb, being buried like the 2 fish in the water, and emerge into consciousness, the consciousness of Ra, or we are going to wait for the waters to be poured out when the age of Aquarius rises upon us. So this is why I read from the most ancient scriptures of Kemet, the chapters of coming forth by day, where I read Reper Emheru Emked Abba Amehet, which means the chapter of coming forth by day after having traversed the tomb. So it speaks of resurrection. So we are, after we traverse the tombs, the waters of ignorance, of stupor, and we emerge out of them, we are going to come forth by day, like the sun, like Ra, like Heru during the winter solstice, when he comes forth as the rebirth of his father. So that concludes the video, and the reason why we ought to go back to the origin. We do not worship Roman gods, and so this is not our new year. This that's coming in 2 days. We are already in our new year that began about 4 months ago. So if you enjoyed this video, please do like, share, and if you're new to this channel, subscribe and press the notification bell for more exciting videos on African history and the African origins of civilization, peace, and Black power. Ashe.